it's skybound with the Talking Joe guys. Everyone calm down. We're here to talk comics, and it's skybound with the Talking Joe guys. Everyone calm down. We're here to talk comics, skybound. Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, where today we will be joined by Destro writer Dan Waters. But I will not be talking to him alone. As always, I will be joined by my co-host. Joining me today from his silent castle, it's a real American Tim. It's...
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. Let's bring in our guest.
Here we go. Joining us today is writer Dan Waters. Dan's many writing credits include Lucifer, House of Whispers, Detective Comics, Sword of Azrael at DC, Loki at Marvel, Homesick Pilots, Coffin Bound, and Limbo at Image. Dan's current work includes Doctor Who, 2 books with Ram V, which are Creature from the Black Lagoon Lives, and The One Hand and the Six Fingers, plus a little book that we are talking about today, which is Destro, launching June 2024. Hiya, Dan.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Tim.
Wait, fact check. The One Hand and the Six Fingers, that's 2 books.
That is, it's 2 books. One by Ram, one by me.
Okay.
Each following each side of a crime. So you get the detective's point of view and you get the killer's point of view.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
2 books.
Thanks for having me.
If we have a little bit of a lag, we're just gonna roll with it. I'm in Boston on the East Coast. Mark is in Sussex in Britain. Dan, where are you coming to us from today?
Right now, I'm in New Jersey, which is a new one for me. But I've been bouncing around a lot this year, between the UK and New York and Athens and Greece. So it's been a bit of a crazy year.
And you just moved to the States?
Yeah, just in New York. Yeah.
Was that related to a lot of work you were doing for American comics publishers?
No, but it definitely helps. But it was my fiance's from here, so I've come over to join her.
Cool.
Typically start with a G.I. Joe question, but I'm going to put that one off slightly. So let's start with a writing question. How do you approach writing generally? Do you like to write in the same place? Do you have a laptop that you bring with you and go to like a favorite cafe or something like that? Or is it a I start at this time, end at this time, this is my space, this is my chair, this is my comfort zone?
No, I'm far more chaotic than that. I think I kind of have to trick my brain out of thinking. I have to have some kind of routine, but I have to kind of trick my brain into thinking it doesn't, because otherwise I get very bored very quickly. But I'm a big notebooker, so everything starts in sort of big A4 moleskin notebooks, and that's kind of the one sort of tradition I have is I always use the same notebook, and then sometimes people will gift me like really lovely notebooks because they know what I do, and it's always like oh, I really appreciate this, it's very sweet, but I'm almost never going to use them because I'm just going to keep buying the same identical notebook. So I use the same notebook and the same pen just because I think everything else is a distraction. And pretty much everything goes into there, all the sort of brain dumps and stuff before anything goes on laptop onto screens.
The letter from you.
And is it a notebook per project?
No, the notebook's just it. I think the kind of point is it doesn't feel real when it's in the notebook because it doesn't look like a script yet. It doesn't look I can spill coffee on it. I can stick my pen through the pages, whatever. Like never precious about any of it. It's just nothing matters until it's real on the screen. So it just feels a lot more freeing.
This sounds like how visual artists approach sketchbooks, where
Yeah.
It can be anything it wants to be, and it's not on fancy paper. It's not in front of an audience yet.
Yeah, exactly. No one's ever going to see it except me. It doesn't need to make sense to anyone else.
So the letters page, there's a letter from you at the end of issue 1 of Destro, and it says that you are coming to G.I. Joe new or relatively new. And so we might sort of skip our traditional first or second question, which is, when did you first become aware of G.I. Joe? But there might be, those shorts, a really interesting answer. So, Dan, when did you first become aware of G.I. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was aware of it as a sort of background thing, in that, you'd see, we get a lot of cultural bleed over to the UK from the States. So I would sort of see this thing, but I definitely, I assumed it was about a guy called Joe, and that took me a long time to figure out that it wasn't that. And instead we had Action Man, which I think I talked about in that letter as well. We had Action Man in the UK, which I liked as a kid. It was a far more James Bondy thing, but it had spun out of Action Force, which was, the UKified G.I. Joe. But I think most of the Joe elements were like long gone by the time I was a kid.
Mark, do you have a prop to hold up to the camera for Dan?
I've got my childhood Action Force Destro here.
That's Action Force Destro. That's
was
cool.
Originally released in 1983, and his initial incarnation, he was called the Red Jackal, before he got renamed to be Destro.
Yeah, I mean, that's a cool name too.
1984, that would have been.
Yeah, there was no. I think it was just Dr. X was Action Man's villain, who was like a sort of, he looked kind of like Dr. Robotnik, but with a mohawk, if I'm remembering that correctly. And that had its own cartoon, and it had these like live action intros where they'd like run around on jet skis and stuff. So that was very sort of captivating as a young kid. But G.I. Joe proper, I didn't encounter until a lot later. The first time I might have seen anything properly G.I. Joe might have been that episode of Community, where Destro gets killed off in about 3 minutes. So that's probably the first time I saw Destro in action.
Were there any okay, so if you are relatively new to G.I. Joe or very new to G.I. Joe, and we want to say that there's no litmus test, there's no quiz, someone doesn't have to be like fan enough to be able to work on G.I. Joe. I think the basic standard is a writer or artist a professional, and can they do the work? If an editor or a publisher has hired someone, that's sort of where we start. So this isn't like, do you know of this most famous G.I. Joe story, or how many toys do you have? This is not that. Are there any, since you are now into the world of G.I. Joe, besides the very small, now existing Energon universe stories, is there anything in the larger world of G.I. Joe that you have looked to for depictions, whether sort of character or visual, of characters, movies, TV, comics, toys, merchandising? Is there anything in G.I. Joe that has started to grab you?
I mean, I think the sort of attitude I took to it. I mean, yes, I'm new to it, and I didn't grow up with it in the same way, and I was very upfront with the editors when they started talking to me about the project, because I didn't want to sort of to not be honest about that. But I was sort of, I was told, like no, that's cool, because we're sort of, this is the Energon universe, and everything is new, and we're going from the ground up. So for me, it was looking at, I mean, honestly, the two things I looked at the most was the original 80s cartoon, and the especially the sort of earlier Larry Hama comics. And it was, to me, it was about sort of finding the commonalities that Destro sort of always has as a character in particular, so that I would definitely be writing a sort of recognizable version of it, sort of going, like, okay, they are going to be slightly different, that they're totally different things. These two particularly iconic sort of pillars of the franchise. So sort of finding, I mean, to be honest, like I sort of looked at them sort of thinking, I'll find a middle ground. But to be honest, Destro is very consistent. So I think it was just about making sure he feels like the same guy who's, who existed in each of those universes. And it's the same guy. And that was the important thing, or the thing that made me feel like I was doing my job properly.
And I've heard you describe Destro as being somewhat smug and I guess sort of leaning into maybe some of the cartoon component of some of that gleeful baddiness that he's got there. Always sort of had these booming laughs whenever he's done something particularly despicable. Do you want to talk about some of the elements that you kind of drawn out into your version? Destro.
Yeah, I guess like so yes, that like the fact that he enjoys what he does, and I think that's kind of consistent. Yeah, that probably is more of the cartoon thing, but he's very confident in what he does. He's done it his whole life. His family have always done it, so he has a bit of a complex with that. But also, and that's maybe something that we dig into a little bit more in this version of him is how heavy that kind of feels on him. Is the Destros have always been the sort of top of the food chain in the arms trade and things, and that was his ancestors have always done that, but that was easier 500 years ago than it is in an age of constantly shifting technologies and and all of the new stuff that's suddenly appearing in this world, with the sort of like incursion of the sort of Cybertron stuff. So he's got to really keep his finger on the pulse in a way that people didn't have to when they were worrying about who had the most gunpowder and the most iron. So that's a side of him that I really enjoyed getting into. And like whenever he does know what he's doing, he approaches it with absolute glee. So whenever he's backfooted, he gets kind of sulky. Whenever he knows what he's doing, he's sort of struts his stuff. The other side to him that I think is really interesting, and this was something that I had to sort of find ways to explore because of the differences in the Andron universe and how early we are starting in the storyline. We're starting before Cobra has really established itself. We're starting before G.I. Joe even exists, and that's his sort of romantic streak. So the Baroness is off doing very different stuff in which if you've read Duke, you'll have seen her there, and she's off on a different trajectory, at least for now. So bringing her into this didn't quite make sense, but I definitely wanted to find a way to show that side of him where he has his very strong kind of personal, like quote unquote ethics, but that also extends into a certain kind of romance, which is frankly pretty toxic and quite obsessive. And I definitely I thought that's a very interesting wrinkle to the character. So that does sort of come through as the book goes on.
I note that in issue 1 of Destro saves Astoria Carlton Ritz from being killed soon after his killer robots kill a bunch of people, including some innocent people or some people who were sort of on his side. So maybe that's some of the toxicity you're referring to.
Yeah, I mean, that's also, there's also, she's a CEO of a competitor, and one of those dying at your events is quite embarrassing. So Mars have promised the security of the people at this event. So the goodness of his heart, I'm not certain that was.
Okay. So we don't know if any Transformers or aliens are going to show up in the Destro miniseries. My guess is no, but I'd be happily proven wrong. If you were new to G.I. Joe, since this is a universe with Transformers, coming into this, did you have connections with Transformers?
Only that I'd also written back when IDW were doing the comics, I did a Halloween special, which I was particularly pleased with the title, which was "I Have No Mouth, But I Must Starscream," which was kind of my intro to that world as well. But Transformers was definitely more of a thing when I was a kid. That was definitely something I had and owned. But it's not a huge part of this story, other than sort of being the catalyst. So it sort of sets everything in motion. Is the fact, and it already has in the Energon universe. The fact that Destro now has access to Energon itself via Cobra Commander. But the sort of hope was to make something that was accessible to anyone who's coming into this, whether they're a long-term fan. Then there's the side of it where you're getting to see this stuff start from scratch and how these two sort of franchises bounce off each other. But it should, and I think I have an ethos for almost every comic I write where it should be. Every comic can be someone's first comic, and it doesn't mean that it should be simple, but it should be accessible, and the stakes within an individual story should always matter on their own, rather than, I don't like reveals where you sort of, where the sort of big reveal of the comic is it's something that pre-exists and therefore you should care. You should care because it matters in the story. So the Transformers side, as far as it affects this comic, is pretty much that their emergence means that the world is changing very quickly in ways that it hasn't before, and there are sort of new technologies and new arms races that are about to start, and Destro needs to be at the forefront of that. The idea that he wouldn't be is absolutely unthinkable to him, and that is the kind of thing that's holding him in allegiance with Cobra Commander, at least for now, because the idea that he would also be someone's number two is unthinkable to him. But the idea of something doing killing better than him is even worse.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in the Cobra Commander issue 5, and then leading into this issue here, that alliance does look already on fairly fragile, kind of shaky ground foundations. I think is the
yeah.
the
They're still feeling each other out.
Coming from yeah. And speaking of Cobra Commander issue 5, how much had you actually seen sort of the those two initial series as you were kind of gearing up for your own?
I mean, as much as existed at the time, we've been sort of keeping abreast of each other, and it was useful that Josh was handling both Duke and Cobra Commander, which is the places that Destro has cropped up so far, because Josh and I had worked together at DC on like Infinite Frontier and a couple of other things, and so we were able to just get on the phone and chat about it and sort of put Destro in the place that he needed to be for building the universe. So I think I'd seen like the first 2 issues of each by the time I'd started scripting, but I had full outlines, I had everything. It was very much about making a story that sort of fit into a certain space.
Dan, can you talk about your pitch? What were the guidelines, or how much were you getting from Daniel Warren Johnson or Joshua Williamson or editors?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely this book was sort of being made for a reason. Like, they knew they wanted this book. I know Josh was talking a lot with our editors, and I think the sort of Destro book came from that those discussions. So by the time I was approached with it, there was a sort of idea in mind in terms of this is where Destro is starting from. Here's what we're leading up towards. I was asked to use to introduce Xamot and Tomax as the sort of antagonists, which I thought was an interesting sort of thing to do, because they're not part of Cobra yet. Destro is kind of trying not to be part of Cobra yet, because he's, as far as he's concerned, they're an alliance. So that was kind of the brief I had, and then I was told to sort of like go in, like, okay, so what's a story that would sort of get us from A to B, and would utilize these characters and put them into conflict with each other. So yeah, it's maybe a little more direction than I have on most projects, but it was an interesting thing to approach in itself, just because, again, this is a ground up thing. And so, okay, so what, looking at it and going, okay, so what differentiates Destro from the twins, from the Crimson Twins at this point in time? They're both CEOs of pretty awful companies that are sort of in competition with each other, but what drives them that's so different and would make them come into conflict rather than into alliance? And then getting them kind of from that place to a place where it's more recognizable as Cobra as we know it.
Yeah, it was an interesting starting and slightly surprising starting point to see that sort of paradigm that we're used to with Tomax and Xamot was very different starting place, that they're not all joined together and working together, that they are at least initially antagonists. So we've got the twins plus their Crimson Guard as a separate faction. So it's sort of instantly piques curiosity as to how or if they're going to end up working together.
Yeah, I mean,
I appreciate that wasn't a question.
I think, yeah, but I think I think it's an interesting question to begin with. I think it's easy to take it as read. It's like, okay, it's Cobra, and there's Cobra Commander, he's the boss, and then there's Destro, and then there's like the Crimson Twins, and there's all these the Baroness, but why do these extremely egotistical, rich people decide that this is the life for them? And I think that's an interesting question in itself, and getting in at the beginning of the story, we really get to explore that.
I was gonna say as well, in terms of the storytelling, I've heard you describe that you don't want to just sort of churn out a basic sort of trying to describe this in a polite way, but you don't want to sort of just churn out something. You want to be able to bring something specific to a project that you're working on, and tap into something specific. What do you think that you're specifically tapping into on this project?
Yeah, I think it's always about wanting to explore something, and I guess really it's a book about power, which is a very tried and tested sort of topic for comic books, where there's a lot of very strong people in spandex sort of running around blowing stuff up, but sort of looking at the arms trade and how that kind of is power is business, I guess, is kind of where this book sort of spoke to me, and what I hopefully have tapped into a little bit with it. And that I think that's kind of exemplified in the sort of difference between Destro and the twins, where Destro sees, he thinks there's an ability to what he does in terms of this is, he's carrying on his family lineage, and they have effectively shaped the world through power, sort of peace through superior firepower. And that's, warfare to him is mankind's base state, and there is an ability to that. It's what we are meant to do, and it's what we're all doing in some form or another. Everything's a struggle. He's pretty Nietzschean at his core. Whereas to the twins, as far as they're concerned, they are businessmen, and war is just a profitable aspect of that, which can tie into other elements of big business.
We are speaking to you the week that issue 1 of Destro is on sale. When were you first approached by Skybound and the timeline, and are you still working on the series? Have you finished your portion of the series?
Yes, I have finished. It is all scripted. Issue 3 is being finished right now on the art front. So I better have finished. To be honest, it all becomes a blur in terms of timelines. It was definitely last year. I guess probably like mid last year. We spent a little time sort of gearing up for it, and bouncing outlines back and forth, and getting it to the right place before we started. But scripting it was a relatively quick process, because by the time we got to that, I feel like I had a pretty solid handle on exactly what this book was and what it was going to look like, and it was just fun to write as well. We worked on quite a tight script deadline. Like I think I was just handing in a script every 3 weeks, where most things work on a monthly schedule, but I really didn't mind it because they were just a lot of fun to sit down and write each time.
Does this story have a title, like Duke Volume 1 and Cobra Commander Volume 1 and Transformers Volume 1 as trade paperbacks? They have Volume 1 and then subtitles. But as a writer, did you think of this miniseries as having a title, a subtitle?
Yeah, it's The Enemy.
Okay.
Which felt somewhat self-explanatory. But I think, to be honest, I think it's the first time I googled Destro, it just came up with, and this might have been some like Google AI nonsense or whatever, but just the first time I googled it just came up with Destro the Enemy, and I was like, that's great. And I think I stuck that at the top of my first pitch sheet, probably in my first notebook page, just Destro the Enemy, and it just stuck. It's just been the title of the story ever since.
I've a feeling I've seen the mock-up of the trade cover with the titles already for Scarlett and Destro, and so I think that sounds familiar. I think that might be on there. What was I going to talk about? Oh yes, I'm going to talk about the art. So some writers are slightly more hands-on in terms of what they want to see on the page, and others, and so beyond just the writing of the script, turning that into editorial. How hands-on have you been with the art? Was there sort of any particular recommendations on artists or direction of or giving notes on sort of the finished product, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I always like to be there to give notes, but the hope is always that you've done enough on the page yourself, on the script page, to give enough direction that you don't need to sort of start chopping and changing things later on. And I always try and think about the sort of the pacing and the amount of panels per page and those kind of things. Like, those can sort of very much vary per project. Depends how talky a book you want to do, how sort of widescreen a sort of comic you want to make, and to me this was very much the latter. It was this should be an action book, this should move quickly, so give the artist more space, to do sort of bigger shots, to do, you know, sort of let the sort of explosions and bloodshed bleed right out to the edges of the page, rather than sort of squeezing action into you know, the last 3 pages of the issue after, you know, 17 pages of just like having to draw just metal heads talking.
I sort of looking at the book, it sort of strikes me with the art that it's the art style is a little bit more close to kind of a modern superhero style that you might see from DC or Marvel, and maybe less stylized compared to the other 3 G.I. Joe and John books. Do you think that was an approach that was sort of taken to try and fit you know, the aesthetic to the story?
I mean, I think there might be like a more, to be honest, I think really what you might be hitting on there is that a lot of the superhero, you know, particularly in the sort of 2000s and through into the through to the now, really, there's been a sort of shift towards the more militarized superhero. You know, starting with sort of particularly like the one that springs to mind is the Ultimates, the original Ultimates book. The sort of idea of the, you know, the sort of super soldier as the sort of like standard for the genre kind of became prominent. So I think it looks like a war book, Destro, which is, you know, very much kind of what it is. But I think maybe more superhero books look like war books now.
Yeah, if I can jump in and sort of maybe triangulate this a little bit. When Brian Hitch drew penciled the Ultimates in 2000, 2001, he was bringing a realism and a photographic hyperrealism to comics that most comics hadn't had to that point. And the pacing of the story was very, quote, widescreen. You know, like every issue, the final page is a full page splash. In his like costume design, he got very like moto and athletic, like motorcycle jackets, like leather, like the ribbing on, you know, like
lots of buckles.
Yes. So it starts to look practical and like gear, and not like Superman's outfit or Mr. Fantastic's outfit or Wolverine's outfit. So I think that's sort of the militarization of it. Yeah. And then I also think of like, you know, when Batman gets a redesign for the New 52 by Jim Lee and some of his collaborators, it's sort of more and more like armor, you know, even down to the sort of like brass knuckles of it, and like whatever is on his knee that sort of has a Batman logo shape, which is very different from how like David Mazzucchelli is drawing Batman in 1987 to look like a man wearing a cloth suit, even though it's really
I mean, we kind of went from the sort of strongman, like circus, you know, influenced costumes, which is, you know, where all all those sort of initials costumes, you know, particularly with the trunks and all of that.
Right.
So I think that's exactly kind of the space we're in, and it's a space that, you know, works very well for Destro.
And to Mark's point about Destro looking maybe like a superhero book, and your point that it looks like a war book, I see it doing a little bit of both. What Andrei Bressan's art doesn't have is some of the like superhero like exaggeration of foreshortening and very pinched linear perspective. And I think when you said it looks like a war book, it actually, Mark gave me some British Action Force stories, which are not easily accessible in America. And in terms of like layout and composition, it does look and feel like a war book, like a combat comic.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in the UK, those were huge.
Crimson Guard.
So...
Right. Sorry, Mark.
I'm lagging. Sorry. I was going to say certainly that sequence of the Crimson Guard sort of laying waste to those troops in the tent is quite striking moment in the book. And yeah, to Dan's point, it's the kind of thing that you don't really see so much in American comics, but certainly in British war comics in the 80s, you would see that kind of thing.
You know, I'll admit that scene slowed the book down a bit. Just like, you know, when I was due to hand in issue 1, and my editor was kind of chasing me on it and was like, oh, are we still getting this today? I was like, maybe, but this scene isn't nasty enough yet. Just give me. I need to make this introduction of the twins nastier. And then I sort of, you know, I think that was a Friday, and then I ended up taking the weekend, and I sent it on Monday, and he was like, yeah, okay, that was worth waiting for. That's pretty nasty.
So we are occasionally aware of either Hasbro or an editor or publisher in charge of G.I. Joe being careful around certain depictions of action, and sometimes something gets slightly redrawn or slightly pulled back. And there's this page in Destro issue 1 in the opening scene where Destro enters the presidential palace, or the head of state's main office, and the general, the guy in charge of the Republic of Darklonia, has this pistol, and Destro refers to if he wants to commit suicide, you know, he can go ahead. And the final panel of this page is we see this guy holding a gun near his head, and his hand is shaking. And then we see a reaction shot of Destro. Destro's smiling, and this is a large panel. It's like 1/3 of the page. And the part of me that's sort of used to the rhythms of comics was like expecting a sound effect, or expecting not like blood splattering, because I don't think Destro was that close, and not even like something reflected in his helmet, because I don't think his helmet quite, or his mask quite works that way. But I did wonder, was there a sound effect in an earlier version of this page or in this script? And so I wanted to ask, in a general sense, Dan, how you find working on a, you know, T for teen G.I. Joe comic that you're writing like a war comic, like a combat comic. How do you find in terms of making it harsh, in terms of your collaborators, in terms of Hasbro?
Yeah, I had no pushback on depictions of violence. I don't think anywhere in the book. I've done enough sort of teen and teen plus comics to sort of know what I can get away with and what I can't. That was an instant of like, I wanted to leave that to the imagination, and focus on and also focus on Destro rather than the Prime Minister at that point, because it's, you know, it's his book, and this is his big intro scene. I think I had written that page, you know, when we were looking for the sort of like preview pages, and I think they did leave that page out, which I didn't want to. It might have just been a little too mean. But I think to be honest, I think the only thing I had a little bit of pushback on, where I just had to sort of like readjust slightly, was it was more sort of pushing the limits of cursing in a teen book than it was any depictions of violence.
I own a comic book store, and all 5 issues of Duke and Cobra Commander plus Scarlett 1 and the Energon special are still out with the new and recent comics. And 2 or 3 times a grown-up with a younger person has looked at all these colorful covers and has expressed some interest. And I have said something like, I think Duke is okay for this reader. Cobra Commander, there's a lot of blood. There's a lot of killing people with blood. So maybe not for your younger reader, or maybe you want to read it first. Destro might be moving more into that category, but
Yeah, it depends. You know, it depends on everyone's taste, really, doesn't it? Like, it's a book about an international war criminal. Like, you've got to go some places with it.
Indeed, and we've sort of basically at time now, so we'll say that we're very much looking forward to seeing where those places that Destro is taken over the course of the next 5 issues, and in terms of you and G.I. Joe, is this a universe that you'd relish exploring further down the line beyond these 5 issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really fun. You know, it's been a new experience, and it's been very sort of liberating and rewarding being in. I sound like I'm in a job interview now, but it's been sort of very.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
It's been yeah, exactly. It's been exciting being part of something from this early, you know, this early doors, and building the foundations of a thing. So yeah, I'd definitely come back. There are some things I'd love to get my teeth into, particularly on this side of the universe, I think.
If you catch any, you know, internet flack or fan flack, you know, like, who's this guy? He doesn't know G.I. Joe. I just want to say to you, Dan, that in 5 or 10 years, we'll be a half generation further into this brand, and there'll be a whole new bunch of readers for whom this is the foundational G.I. Joe. And so if not right now, like, yes, you might still be new to G.I. Joe in 2023 when you're first invited, but laying some groundwork for responses you can give in the future. Like, yeah, I was there at the beginning.
God, I saw a solicitation. I think it was Doctor Who's solicitation that, you know, for the book I'm doing, which also comes out this month. But I think that called me DC Comics veteran, and you know, I saw that and my bones immediately crumbled to dust.
Because you've been writing, you've been writing for DC for like 3 years, right?
Yeah, those years move quickly. And they definitely have aged me.
You'll have some white in your beard before too long. Mark, do you want to say the wrap up things?
Yeah, so Dan, just to give you a bit of space to promote things beyond Destro, what should people be looking out for, and where can they find you?
You can find me on the sort of usual social media platforms at Dan PG Waters across all of them. Destro comes out this week. Next week, I have Doctor Who issue 1, which is, you know, quite a different kettle of fish, but it's something quite pleasing about doing something so stalwartly American and British back to back. This sort of, yeah, King of the Nerds across the Atlantic is the title I'm hoping for. But that One Hand, Six Fingers, my book, The Six Fingers, issue 4 is currently out. Issue 5, the finale should be next month. And that's, you know, that's been a real passion project. So I hope if people, you know, enjoy this, then they'll go find that too. Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Creature from Black Lagoon Lives, also out from Skybound, which is a collaboration with Ram V, is also halfway through. And I think for now that's the slate.
Very good. So to our listeners, if you are new to Talking Joe, you can find us at talkingjoe.co.uk. That is the place that has links to all of our social medias all across those interwebs. So if you like this, then check out more. Tim, where can people find you when you're not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com. My brick and mortar comic book shop is Hub Comics, and my partners and I post video essays on TV and film at our YouTube channel, which is at Atomic Abe.
Very good. So it's reached that time in the show where we're wrapping up, and I just give a few seconds for Tim to embarrass himself, as I say.
Dan, this is a reference to the 1988 television toy commercial jingle. Mark.
I think we are all done talking to Dan, and you can catch us next time. But in the meantime, make sure that you remember.
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
There we go. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Tim.
Cheers. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.